Right, everyone, let's jump into the first section of our chapter on deviance and crime and social control. And the first section will look at deviance and social control. We'll start out with deviance, defining what it is, and then next we'll look at social control. So sociologists refer to deviance as any violation of established norms. These norms can be contextual, cultural, or social. So what are norms? This is something that you already learned from the previous chapter, and so I recommend you to go back if you need to review this. But here I'll just quickly remind you that norms are the expectations or rules of behaviors that develop out of a group's values. Norms make social life possible by making behavior predictable. Without norms, social chaos would exist. The reason deviance is seen as threatening is because it undermines predictability. Thus, social control, the formal and informal means of enforcing norms, is necessary for social life. Now, what are values, which norms are based on? Values, and again, we already discussed this, so this is just a quick review and reference for you. Values are the standards by which people define good and bad, beautiful and ugly. Every group develops both values and expectations regarding the ways to reflect them. So with that in mind, deviance, therefore, because norms are, expectations, rules, and behaviors that change over time. Therefore, so is deviance. Deviance, yes, it's about not following rules and norms, but then again, the rules and norms vary and change by time and space. So, therefore, it's relative and subjective. It depends, how something, an action or behavior is judged is dependent on many social factors, such as location, the audience who's involved in the same context, in this context, the time, in the social context, and also the social location of the individual. So, to sociologists, everyone is deviant. So you may not be deviant locally to your friends and family, but I bet you will feel, somewhat out of place, especially if you travel to another country, another state, or even another school. You are seen as different, and you might be violating some local norms that you may not be even aware of. So to sociologists, it is not the act itself that makes an action deviant, but rather how society reacts to it. So, for example, in many Asian countries, it's very normal for heterosexual men to hold hands. In the Middle East and other parts of the world outside the U.S., it's very common for heterosexual men to kiss each other on the cheeks. However, this same act, right, whether it's a kiss on the cheek or holding hands among heterosexual men, is probably seen as somewhat deviant for the same heterosexual men to do that in the U.S. So again, it's not the act itself that makes an action deviant. In the example I gave you, it's the same act. But because the societies are different, U.S. versus other countries, the same act is seen as deviant in one context and not deviant in another context. Because different groups have different norms, what is deviant to some is not deviant to others. This is true even for criminal deviance, the violation of rules that have been written into law. Deviants are people who violate rules, whether the infraction is minor, such as jaywalking, or serious, such as murder. When sociologists study deviance, they are non-judgmental. They are not judging whether the behavior is good or bad, just that it's viewed negatively by people within the social group. To sociologists, again, all people are deviants because everyone violates rules from time to time. A famous sociologist by the name Irving Goffman used the term stigma to refer to attributes that discredit one's claim to a normal identity. A stigma, such as having a facial birthmarks or certain tattoos, etc., defines a person's master status, which is a status that supersedes all other statuses the person occupies. Here I've included a YouTube video for you that gives you an overview of deviance. I highly recommend that you stop this lecture video to watch this video. Okay, now we're going to social control. So, social control is the regulation and enforcement of norms. In discussing social control, it's important to understand social order, which is an arrangement of practices and behaviors on which society's members base their daily lives on. So norms, therefore, is part of social control, well, one way to think about it is that social control is kind of like an employee handbook. Social order is like an employee handbook, whereas social control is the manager. It enforces regulations in order to maintain the social order, or make sure that everyone follows everything that's written in the employee handbook. Sanctions are the means of enforcing the rules. So we'll go into details in the next slide. Sanctions, there are 4 types, and they can be classified in 2 ways. First, there can be positive sanctions. So positive sanctions are rewards given for conforming to norms. Negative sanctions, on the other hand, reflects disapproval of a particular behavior that might include frowns, gossips, for breaking a folkway, or it may also include imprisonment and capital punishment for breaking a more. Now, what are folkways and more? I highly recommend you to review our previous chapter where we discussed folkway and mores as part of norms. Sanctions can also be classified as informal or formal. Informal sanctions are unofficial. They emerge in face-to-face interactions. On the other hand, formal sanctions are official recognition and enforcement of norms and violations. So formal sanctions are usually enforced they're regulated and enforced by institutions such as the government, the law, educational system, the criminal justice systems, for example. So here I'll give you some examples of which in each box. So informal and positive sanctions might include things such as an expression of thanks, a smile, compliments, and an ovation. Negative informal sanctions might include shaming, an angry comment, frowning, and negative gossips. Formal and positive sanctions may include salary, degree, promotion at work, financial rewards. Formal negative sanctions might include expulsion, imprisonment, death penalty, a parking ticket. So let me ask, shaming in our society is actually quite prevalent in many societies. And in general, most sanctions are informal, and particularly negative ones, such as shaming. And shaming is particularly effective when used by members of a primary group or in a small community. Shaming can be the centerpiece of public ritual, marking the violator as deviant of the entire world to see. So in our previous chapter, we learned about this concept called degradation ceremony. So this is the ceremony to describe formal attempts to label someone as an outsider, and that might include shaming. Okay, so that includes the first part of our chapter. In the next part, we'll go into section 2.